With less than 24 hours left to empty his family garage, single dad Daniel Mercer connected an air hose to the last lift. The lift did not move. Instead, the concrete floor behind him split open, and beneath it sat a forgotten Indy race car, hidden for more than 50 years. Before Daniel could inspect it, billionaire CEO Vanessa Cole stepped between him and the car. "Anything inside this building belongs to me." Then she cut the power, called a locksmith, and warned him. Whatever remained at 6 tomorrow would be seized. Daniel had no title, no receipt, almost no time, breath. But behind an old steel plate was one sealed document Vanessa never expected him to find. When Daniel demanded that it be opened on camera, her entire claim began to unravel. The question was whether he had found it in time. Cole Motor Holdings had bought 3 Baxter Street parcels for a private showroom. Daniel had received 90 days' notice and spent most of them serving customers while packing after dark. At a possession conference 3 days earlier, he signed a surrender agreement giving him access from 6 Thursday until 6 Friday to remove tenant-owned equipment and records. Property voluntarily left afterward could be treated as abandoned. Vanessa brought a camera crew to turn his final day into proof that her redevelopment was on schedule. Now, an unknown machine was lifting a car she had not paid to find. Owen crouched near the seam without crossing it. He had Daniel's narrow shoulders and his habit of looking at mechanisms before faces. "That's not the alignment lift," he said. "No." Daniel pointed to 2 steel rails under the rising slab. "Separate carriage, same air supply." Vanessa's property manager, Martin Sloan, stepped closer. "The slab is part of the building. The top plate looks like concrete because somebody poured a skin into a steel pan," Daniel said. "It's moving on rollers." "You're speculating. I'm observing." Vanessa told the videographer to stop recording. The red light went dark, but Owen glanced toward the man's second camera and saw that it had captured the first 3 minutes. That mattered later. Daniel asked for permission to raise the platform far enough to prevent the mechanism from settling unevenly. Martin refused. Vanessa said her attorneys would inspect it in the morning. Then she ordered the building power shut off. The fluorescent lights snapped dark. Breath. The portable lamps Daniel had brought for the move stayed on, throwing long shadows across the opening. "The air compressor is mine," Daniel said. "So is the hose. Take them," Vanessa replied. "The platform stays where it is." She called the locksmith over and instructed him to change the exterior cylinders as soon as Daniel left. Daniel held up the surrender agreement. Paragraph 4 gives me continuous access until 6 tomorrow. It gives you access to remove property. It doesn't give you a right to investigate mine. Changing the locks would block both. For the first time, Vanessa looked uncertain. Martin whispered to her, and she changed the instruction. One security guard would remain at the front door, and Daniel could enter or leave after signing a log. No one could approach the opening without Martin present. It was a narrow retreat, but it told Daniel she knew the paper mattered. The moving crew arrived at 6:35 with a rollback truck and a low machinery trailer. Daniel had booked them for 4 hours. Their foreman, Ray Tolliver, took one look at the half-raised platform and said the old alignment lift could not be safely removed until the floor mechanism was either lowered and isolated or raised and locked. Vanessa refused both operations. Ray charged a 2-hour minimum and pulled his trucks to the curb. That was Daniel's first cost. The $1,200 came from the deposit for his next shop, a former city bus maintenance bay 7 miles away. He signed Ray's ticket because the crew had shown up and because working men did not finance somebody else's dispute by going unpaid. Owen watched him fold the yellow receipt into his shirt pocket. Sigh. That was most of the compressor money. "I know. We could get the car out while they're arguing." Daniel looked at the dark opening. A block and tackle rig, 2 skates, and a patient hour might have put the roadster on Ray's trailer. It also might have turned an ownership question into a theft charge. "We don't move what we can't prove is ours," he said. "She's already saying it's hers. That doesn't change the rule." Daniel's father, Frank, had started Mercer Alignment in 1982 after years maintaining commercial lifts. He could level a rack to the thickness of a business card but kept poor books and worse explanations. Owen searched the last file cabinet and found black service ledgers. Baxter Street entries began in 1959. Air cradle inspection. Replace west seal. Later entries read, storage rack cycle. Preserve unit B. Beside the initials RK. Vanessa stood 10 feet away with Martin and her security guard. Daniel angled the ledger toward the light, took photographs of every page, and put the book in Owen's backpack. "That ledger stays in the building," Vanessa said. "It was in my file cabinet. It concerns installed equipment. It also contains 40 years of my father's work records." Martin held out his hand. "We can copy the relevant pages." Daniel closed the backpack. "The agreement says my business records are personal property. If your lawyer wants a copy, send a request." The security guard shifted his weight but did not intervene. Vanessa studied Daniel as if recalculating the price of him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "It was easy until you shut off the power." At 7:10, Daniel called Susan Bell, the lawyer who handled his surrender agreement. She told him not to operate, clean, or touch the car. A trade fixture could remain personal property, she explained, but the documents and intended attachment mattered. Daniel emailed a request for joint inspection, restored power, safe stabilization, and a deadline extension. Cole's lawyer denied obstruction, claimed all subgrade systems and contents, allowed viewing only from the edge, and kept the 6 o'clock deadline. The 19-minute response told Susan that Cole already understood the risk. They measured from the edge. The 17-foot platform rode on guide channels independent of the building columns. A brass tag wired to the steering brace showed 3 unclear characters. Daniel recognized the proportions of a front-engine Indy roadster, but builders moved bodies and parts between chassis. "I know what it resembles," he told Owen. "That's not the same thing as knowing what it is." At 8:20, Susan called back. The deed described the land and building but did not mention the cradle or car. The seller's disclosure said no personal property was included, except a rooftop unit, 2 fire cabinets, and security cameras. Vanessa had purchased through a bank receivership after the last owner defaulted. The bank's asset schedule listed building improvements, as is, with no equipment inventory. "That helps," Susan said, "but silence doesn't prove your ownership." Daniel turned another page in Frank's ledger. The 1,971 entries stopped referring to Baxter Competition Garage. A new customer appeared, Randall Kessler, 4187 Baxter Street. In 1982, one line read, "Bought East Rack, compressor, cradle, contents per invoice, credit against service account." Daniel read it twice. "Breath. Invoice number?" Susan asked. "F8217. Find it." The invoice was not in the cabinet. At 9, Vanessa's team taped off the opening. In the empty office, she showed Daniel an unpaid $83,000 equipment note from Frank to Randall Kessler. It was her strongest argument. Frank had serviced the cradle, owed the former owner money, and left no title to a car. Daniel knew his father's paperwork was poor enough for the debt to be real. Vanessa offered Daniel 5 years in the rear bay at his old rent if he assigned every claim to the platform and car. The lease would save his business, but he could not transfer property before knowing who owned it. "Put the offer in writing," he said, "and state that it expires if the car is found not to belong to Cole Motor Holdings." "Why?" "Because I'm not selling you somebody else's property." He asked her to send the debt note to Susan and left without agreeing. At 9:47, Owen found a clue that did not solve ownership, but changed where they looked. One ledger entry from December 1981 included 4 words after the invoice number. "Copy behind west plate." The west wall held dozens of old inspection plates, electrical boxes, and patched holes. Most had already been photographed for the move. Daniel examined them under a portable lamp. Behind the compressor disconnect was a steel certification plate secured by 4 slotted screws. Frank had stamped inspection dates around its border. The center carried a faded maker's mark for Kessler Industrial Lift Company. Daniel did not remove it. He photographed the note, the plate, and the surrounding wall, then emailed Susan and Vanessa's lawyer asking for joint removal. Vanessa refused, calling it part of the building. Susan replied that Daniel's inability to retrieve a specifically identified business record was further obstruction under the surrender agreement. She proposed that Martin remove the plate while both sides recorded. At 10:15, Martin finally agreed. The screws came out with difficulty. Breath. Behind the plate was a shallow wall cavity lined with sheet metal. Inside lay a waxed envelope, a folded blueprint, and a square black and white photograph. Martin reached first. Daniel stopped him with a raised palm. "Both cameras on," he said. They filmed the contents before anyone touched them. Martin removed each item with nitrile gloves and placed it on the empty desk. Breath. The invoice was brittle but readable. Dated the 12th of March 1982, it recorded a sale from Randall Kessler to Frank Mercer. One Baxter 4-post alignment rack, one Quincy compressor, related air piping, and subfloor storage cradle with all present contents. The total purchase price was $83,000, paid by assumption of the same amount due under Frank's equipment note. Across the bottom, in blue ink, faded nearly gray, Kessler had written, "Note, satisfied by transfer. No balance." Frank and Kessler had both signed. Owen let out a breath. Daniel did not. A private invoice was evidence, but Vanessa could challenge authenticity, authority, and whether the unidentified car had been present on the sale date. The blueprint showed why the platform mattered. It was titled, Portable Below-Grade Vehicle Storage Cradle, Model BC2. The rails rested on steel sleepers, bolted to a self-contained frame. 4 isolation pads separated that frame from the building footings. A note in the lower corner read, "Unit designed for removal through west service opening." The photograph was the most personal item. Frank, younger than Daniel had ever known him, stood beside the open floor wearing a Kessler lift shirt. A front-engine roadster rested on the platform. Randall Kessler held the air valve. On the back, Frank had written, "Lowered backup after final preservation, the 17th of October, 1971. R. K. Asked me to keep the cradle alive." Vanessa looked at the 3 items for a long time. "Copies," she said to Martin. "Originals remain here." Daniel shook his head. "The invoice conveyed personal property to my father. The original is an estate record." Her lawyer joined by video call. Susan joined from her kitchen table. For 12 minutes, the 2 attorneys argued over custody while the cameras recorded the documents on the desk. They reached a temporary protocol. Each item would be placed in a clear evidence sleeve, scanned, and held overnight in a locked file cabinet. Both parties would sign across tamper seals. Neither side conceded ownership. It was not possession, but it prevented the papers from disappearing. At 11:30, Susan filed an emergency petition in county court seeking preservation of the car and cradle, access for inspection, and an extension of the move deadline. She did not ask the judge to award final title overnight. She asked for enough time to keep either side from destroying the answer. The duty judge scheduled a remote preservation conference for 8 Friday morning. Vanessa read the notice on Martin's phone. "You filed against my project before you even authenticated the signature. You offered me rent before you authenticated the car," Daniel replied. That landed without anyone raising a voice. At midnight, the first measurable test came from the building itself. With permission limited to external measurements, Daniel ran a machinist's straight edge across the joint. Martin watched. The cradle's upper pan had risen 3 7/16 inches. All 4 corners differed by less than a 1/16. A structural slab broken loose by accident would not rise square on roller guides. Daniel then showed where the main alignment lift's air line divided through a labeled shuttle valve. One branch fed the familiar lift. The other vanished to 4 synchronized cylinders beneath the cradle. Both systems shared air, but not structure. Ray Tolliver returned voluntarily after Daniel sent him the blueprint. He stood outside the caution tape, compared its dimensions with the visible channels, and signed a short declaration. In his professional judgment, the cradle was removable machinery, not a load-bearing building component. He would not move it until both sides authorized safe locking points. Vanessa's lawyer dismissed Ray as Daniel's hired mover. Ray handed Daniel back the $1,200 check. "I charged you because my crew lost the night," he said. "I'm returning it because I won't be used to prove you abandoned a job they stopped." Daniel refused the refund. Ray had paid 3 men. Instead, he asked Ray to hold the check until Monday. If the court ordered Cole to cover obstruction costs, Ray could cash Daniel's and refund the duplicate. If not, Daniel still owed him. Older men understood each other quickest when the issue was, who would carry the loss? At 12:40, Owen found a date cast into one guide wheel. Breath, 1958. The floor around it had been poured in 1966, according to the building permit Susan obtained. The machinery predated the slab by 8 years. That fact weakened Vanessa's claim that the cradle had been constructed as an inseparable building improvement. It did not prove who owned the car. The car remained the larger question. The photograph showed a similar roadster, but the nose in 1971 carried a narrow dark stripe, now hidden under oil. No chassis number was visible from the floor edge. Daniel could not reach the steering tag without crossing the barrier. At 1:15, Vanessa offered a controlled inspection at 7 in the morning by an appraiser of her choosing. Daniel proposed one neutral motorsports historian and one conservator, with no cleaning beyond a cotton swab on a designated identification surface. Susan added that the inspection be recorded continuously. Vanessa refused the neutral historian. Her lender, she said, would accept only a nationally recognized appraiser. "This isn't about value," Daniel said. "It's about identity and title. Value determines how much protection it needs. Ownership determines who gets to choose the protection." They were arguing in a circle when Owen pulled, his father aside. The boy's phone showed a magnified image of the brass steering tag. The first characters were not BC2, they were BG2. Baxter Grand Prix, Owen guessed. Daniel knew another possibility. In Frank's ledger, the phrase "Preserve Unit B" had appeared beside the initials RK, but one 1,964 entry said BG Team Storage. He searched the phrase on a public newspaper archive. The results named Braddock Gaines Racing, a small Indianapolis team that entered front-engine roadsters between 1,958 and 1,964. Its best-known driver, Walt Gaines, won a national championship in 1961 but missed the Indianapolis race the next year after a practice crash. The team folded in 1967. Period articles stated that its two remaining chassis were dismantled to satisfy creditors. One chassis had later surfaced in a private collection. Breath. The backup had never been found. Daniel turned the phone so Owen could see. "That's a lead," he said. "Not proof." The ledger supplied a second seed. In May 1962, Frank had written, "Repaired right steering brace after Walt's south turn hit, added fishplate per Joe B." The photograph from 1971 showed the right side of the cockpit, but the brace was hidden under canvas. Owen searched for Walt Gaines and found an obituary from 11 years earlier. Walt's younger brother, Leon, had been a team mechanic. Leon was 89 and lived at a retirement community north of the city. Daniel would not call a man at 1:30 in the morning. He sent an email to the community's general address, explaining that an old race chassis and a work record bearing the Gaines name had been found. He asked staff to show Leon the message after breakfast if the man was willing. Then Daniel made Owen sleep. Owen slept in the pickup while Daniel watched the site. Beside the West plate, Frank's old air gauge carried a red mark at 90 pounds. Frank once explained that the mark meant enough. More pressure did not make a careful machine work better. At 3:10, Martin brought coffee. He said Cole's demolition loan would cost $18,000 a day if the site was late. Vanessa's father had lost a repair shop after trusting a handshake lease, and she had built her company around documented ownership. Daniel acknowledged that the invoice still had to prove the car was present in 1982. But if documents protected her, he said, they have to protect somebody else, too. At 5:40, a black SUV entered the lot. Vanessa's appraiser, Curtis Vane, arrived 2 hours before the proposed inspection. He wore a museum badge on a lanyard and carried a hard case. Vanessa met him at the door. Daniel immediately emailed Susan that the appraiser was on site without an agreed protocol. Curtis approached the barrier, used a long inspection mirror, and photographed the suspension. He did not touch the car. After 10 minutes, he told Vanessa the chassis could be a period roadster, but that photographs alone could not distinguish a complete original from a later assembly. It was an honest answer. Then Curtis pointed to the floor pan. "Whatever the car is, do not cycle that cradle again until the cylinder locks are inspected. If one seal fails, the platform could rack." Daniel agreed. Vanessa wanted the car at floor height for the court conference. Curtis refused to approve operation. That was the first time her own expert limited her. At 6:15, Owen woke and brought Daniel the ledger. The retirement community had replied. Leon Gaines had seen the email. He would speak by video at 9:30 with a staff member present, but he would not identify a car from general photographs. He asked for close images of the right steering brace, the rear spring perch, and the underside of the dashboard. Those were precisely the areas Daniel could not reach. At 7, both attorneys negotiated an inspection protocol in anticipation of the court call. Curtis would supervise. Daniel could enter the platform wearing a safety harness once Ray installed temporary mechanical blocks from outside. A conservator from the Hoosier Motor Heritage Foundation, Elaine Porter, would join remotely. No part would be removed. Storage oil could be lifted from one 2-inch identification patch using approved solvent on a swab. Each side could photograph. Vanessa accepted because her lender's counsel had joined the discussion. The lender wanted the risk defined before the judge did it for them. Ray's crew returned at 7:20. They inserted 4 rated stands at blueprint-designated points without moving the cradle. Daniel tested each stand with a pry bar and signed Ray's safety sheet. Only then did he step across the barrier. Up close, the roadster looked less glamorous and more human. The aluminum skin carried hammer marks under the paint. Safety wire still crossed the knockoff hubs. A dried leather glove lay beside the seat. The canvas cover came away in Curtis's hands because it was not attached. On the right steering brace, beneath a brown line of preservative, Daniel found a triangular reinforcement plate with 3 unequal weld beads. One corner bore 2 center punch marks. Leon Gaines appeared on a tablet held by a nurse. Age had narrowed his face, but not his attention. He asked Curtis to move the camera closer, then farther back. "My brother's car had a brace replaced after he clipped the inside wall in practice," Leon said. "Joe Barlow welded that fish plate in the truck lot because the garage was full. Joe marked every repair he wanted checked with 2 punch dots." "Can you identify this chassis?" Susan asked. "I can identify that repair. A man could copy it if he knew it existed. Almost nobody did. It was useful, careful testimony, stronger because Leon refused to say more than he knew. The chassis number lay on the left rail, under a thick layer of black preservative. Elaine Porter directed the cleaning by video. Daniel used a cotton swab, then another, never scraping metal. 6 stamped digits emerged, followed by the letters BG. Owen read them aloud for the cameras. Elaine compared the sequence with a 1,961 insurance schedule held by her foundation. The schedule listed 2 Braddock Gaines chassis. One ended in 41 BG and matched the restored car already known. The other ended in 42 BG and was described as Reserve Roadster, complete less race engine. Breath. The number under Daniel's hand ended in 42 BG. No one celebrated. Curtis asked to see the stamp under angled light. He compared digit depth, corrosion, and surrounding paint. "It appears old," he said. "Authentication requires more than one number." Daniel respected him for saying it. The 8 o'clock court conference began with everyone still around the car. Judge Miriam Holt appeared on a laptop from Chambers. Susan did not ask her to decide title. She presented the invoice, blueprint, guide wheel date, photograph, chassis number, and access dispute. Cole's attorney argued that the documents had been hidden in the building, that the invoice's signatures were unverified, and that any personal property claim should have been disclosed during the receivership. Judge Holt asked Daniel why he had not listed the cradle on the surrender inventory. "I didn't know it existed," he said. "And the car?" Same answer. The judge asked Vanessa whether demolition could proceed around the disputed area. "Not under my lender's schedule," Vanessa said. "The center slab has to be removed Monday. Then the risk of irreversible harm is not theoretical." Clearthroat Judge Holt ordered that the cradle, car, documents, and surrounding 20 feet remain unchanged for 72 hours. She extended Daniel's removal window for undisputed equipment by the exact number of hours access had been restricted. She authorized a joint survey and directed both parties to submit chain of title evidence by Monday. She did not award the car to Daniel. She did not stop all construction. She preserved the question. Vanessa's face showed no outward reaction until the call ended. Then she turned to Martin. "Move demolition to the East Bay. Document every delay." It was not surrender. It was a businesswoman, absorbing a legal setback and continuing the project. Daniel's deadline had expanded, but his practical problem had not. The old alignment rack still needed to leave. Ray's crew disconnected it while the hidden cradle remained blocked. By 11, the rack sat on the machinery trailer. At noon, the compressor followed. Every item crossed a checklist signed by Daniel and Martin. At 12:30, Cole's attorney sent a formal notice accusing Daniel of removing integrated air controls that served the cradle. Daniel stopped the crew before they cut the branch line. He capped the compressor outlet and left the cradle valve assembly in place under seal. That decision cost him the use of his compressor at the new bay, until a new control manifold could be fitted. It also denied Vanessa a credible claim that he had disabled the disputed equipment. Owen looked at the capped line. "She'd have blamed us if we took it." "Probably." "You knew that?" "I knew the valve served both machines. Her lawyer supplied the rest." At 1:15, the Foundation's archivist found a 1,972 storage declaration signed by Randall Kessler. It described chassis 42BG as being held for the benefit of unresolved team creditors pending release. That document threatened Daniel's claim. If Kessler had only custody, he might not have had authority to sell the contents to Frank in 1982. Sigh. Susan called it the first serious hole in their chain. The old Braddock Gaines team had dissolved in bankruptcy. Its assets should have been distributed by a trustee. Public records from the case had been moved to state archives and partly damaged in a basement flood. The surviving index showed a 1,979 order disposing of remaining shop equipment and miscellaneous competition components to satisfy Kessler's storage lien, but the detailed schedule was missing. If the roadster was on that schedule, Kessler gained title. If not, descendants of team creditors might have a claim. Vanessa learned of the gap within the hour. Her attorney amended Cole's position. If the car was not a fixture, Cole argued, it was abandoned property found on Cole's land, not Daniel's inheritance. The old invoice could not convey title Kessler lacked. At 2, Vanessa called police and reported that Daniel had asserted control over a car in her building. Officer Maria Chen reviewed the preservation order, seals, and signed inventory. Nothing prohibited had been moved. She told both sides that ownership remained a civil matter and left without making an arrest. Owen had gone pale. Daniel offered to send him safely to his mother in Ohio. "I don't want you thinking staying proves something," Daniel said. "Then stop acting like doing this alone proves something." Daniel gave him a real part in the response. Photograph every capped line and add each image to the inventory. Owen was no longer only witnessing the dispute. He was building the record. By 3:30, the undisputed shop equipment was out. The office stood empty. The old fire cabinet still held the sealed invoice, blueprint, and photograph under the court order. Daniel had 2 hours and 30 minutes before Vanessa's original deadline, though the judge's extension now protected him. He could have left and waited for lawyers. Instead, he used the time to solve the title gap. Frank's ledger contained one recurring name beside the storage entries: Marion County Trust. Escrow. Susan searched the state archive index and found that the trust company had acted as dispersing agent in the Braddock Gaines bankruptcy. Its successor bank still existed. The bank would not release records based on a phone call from a mechanic. Susan prepared a subpoena request, but Monday was the earliest court review. Daniel looked again at the 1,979 index. The order number included a microfilm reel reference. State archives closed at 5. Owen drove because Daniel's hands had begun to shake from fatigue. They reached the archive reading room at 4:22. Susan emailed the court order and authorization letter while they signed in. A records specialist named Thomas Avery explained that the flood-damaged originals could not be handled, but the microfilm reel had been duplicated. The reel contained 400 pages in no obvious order. Daniel and Owen split the images between 2 viewers. They scanned invoices, creditor lists, legal notices, and photographs. At 4:51, Owen found a schedule labeled Property Released Against Storage and Maintenance Lien. Breath. Line 7 read, Braddock Gaines Reserve Chassis BG42, Body, Running Gear, Steering Assembly, Storage Cradle and associated covers, no competition engine. The recipient was Randall Kessler. The order authorized him to retain and dispose of the property after 30 days if no creditor redeemed it. Attached was a certified statement dated 43 days later. No redemption received. Thomas printed certified copies before locking the room at 5. The certification fee was $68. Daniel's debit card was declined because the moving deposits had cleared. Owen paid with money he had saved from weekend break jobs. Daniel started to object. "You can put it on my timesheet," Owen said. That was Frank's kind of humor, practical enough to cover embarrassment. They returned to Baxter Street at 5:48. Vanessa stood under a temporary work light with her lender's counsel and 3 board members on speakerphone. A typed transfer agreement waited on the office desk. It offered Daniel a 5-year lease in the rear bay, reimbursement of moving expenses, and $75,000. In exchange, Frank Mercer's estate would assign every claim to the cradle and car and warrant that no competing heir existed. The offer expired at 6. Daniel read all 4 pages. The lease could keep his shop alive. The cash would replace what he had spent and cover Owen's school. The warranty, however, made Daniel personally responsible if another claimant emerged. More importantly, the agreement required both sides to state that Cole Motor Holdings had discovered and preserved the car. "You know that sentence isn't true," Daniel said. Vanessa stood with her arms folded. "My company secured the property. After my air hose raised the cradle, your father hid it for 40 years. He maintained it. We don't know why he stayed quiet. We know he left you a debt and a mess." That criticism was accurate enough to hurt. Daniel placed the certified bankruptcy schedule beside the agreement. "We also know Randall Kessler received title in 1979 and sold the cradle with its contents to Frank in 1982. The debt was the purchase price, and the invoice marked it satisfied." Vanessa read the schedule. Her lender's counsel asked for a copy. Her attorney joined by phone and said authentication still remained. "It will," Daniel replied, "but I won't sign a false discovery statement or warrant away claims I haven't had time to identify." Breath. The shop clock changed to 6. Vanessa picked up the transfer agreement. For a second, Daniel thought she might tear it. Instead, she wrote, "Withdrawn at 6 p.m., across the front, and initialed it. "Then we proceed in court," she said. Daniel had refused the easiest rescue of his business. The cost became real 10 minutes later when his new landlord called. Cole Motor Holdings had asked whether the bus bay's zoning allowed vehicle restoration and whether its fire suppression inspection was current. The landlord, frightened by controversy, suspended Daniel's access pending municipal review. Vanessa did not admit making the call. She did not have to. Sigh. Daniel and Owen spent Friday night in a motel beside the interstate because the new bay was locked and their equipment sat on trailers. Daniel paid with the shop's emergency credit card. Owen fell asleep fully dressed. Daniel sat at the small table and studied Frank's photograph. On its back, below the line about preservation, faint pencil marks appeared under sidelight. Daniel angled his phone until he could read them. "If creditors clear, title with cradle. Frank knows release file." His father had known. He had hidden the document behind the inspection plate, perhaps because the building changed owners, perhaps because a valuable car invited the wrong attention. But he had never told Daniel. The omission felt less like protection than another burden Frank had chosen for his son without asking. Daniel called his older sister, Anne, who lived in Louisville. As co-heir to Frank's estate, she had a legal interest in any newly discovered property. Daniel expected disbelief. Anne was silent, then asked for the documents. After reading them, she said, "Dad told me there was one thing under the shop he was keeping for somebody. I thought he meant money." "When?" "The week before his surgery. He said if you ever found it, you'd know what was fair." Daniel closed his eyes. Breath. "That isn't an instruction." "No, it's Dad making you finish a sentence he didn't have the nerve to say." Anne could have claimed half the car and forced a sale. Instead, she signed Susan's declaration confirming that the estate had never administered the newly found property and authorizing preservation. She did not waive her interest. She insisted that ownership be handled openly. That choice changed Daniel's. Until then, he had been defending against Vanessa. Now he understood that winning title would only begin the harder question of what to do with it. On Saturday morning, the Hoosier Motor Heritage Foundation assembled a controlled inspection team at Baxter Street. Judge Holt had authorized it after reviewing the bankruptcy schedule. Elaine Porter arrived with a corrosion conservator. Curtis Vane represented Cole. A court reporter documented each step. Leon Gaines attended by video. They raised the cradle 6 more inches only after a lift engineer tested the cylinders and installed locks. The old gauge needle climbed to Frank's red line and stopped at 90 pounds. Daniel did not add pressure. The platform came level with the floor. For the first time, they saw the complete roadster. Its engine bay was empty, as the bankruptcy schedule described. The gearbox, rear axle, steering, and brakes remained. On the left body panel, under removable storage wax, Elaine found traces of a dark blue stripe matching the 1971 photograph. The dashboard carried 4 mounting holes in a pattern visible in a 1961 team photograph. The rear spring perch bore an inspection stamp linked to the same chassis batch. Leon identified the hand-shaped heel rest he had made for his brother. Then he corrected himself. "I made it for Walt," he said. "That doesn't prove Walt raced this body every time." Teams moved panels. Again, restraint increased credibility. A metallurgical scan dated the aluminum composition and rivets to the correct period without removing samples. Curtis compared welds with the known sister chassis. and found 3 matching fabrication habits: a reversed gusset on the left rail, uneven torch cuts under the seat, and a serial stamp made with the same damaged number 4. At noon, Curtis signed a joint preliminary finding. Chassis 42BG was the missing Braddock Gaines Reserve Roadster and retained substantial original material. Final authentication would require months, not hours, but the identity question had crossed from possibility to documented probability. Vanessa asked everyone, except Daniel and the attorneys, to leave the office. She placed no new offer on the desk. "My board wants litigation," she said. "They believe your father's estate abandoned any claim by leaving the car here through 3 property transfers," Susan answered. "The estate didn't know the property existed. The cradle remained maintained, enclosed, and documented. Abandonment requires intent, not ignorance alone. My title insurer says the bank conveyed everything it could lawfully convey." That sentence is doing a lot of work. Vanessa looked at Daniel. "I can delay your zoning hearing. I can also stop interfering and tell the city I raised a routine question. Assign me 51%. You restore the car here. My company funds it. Your name goes on the work." It was her credible chance to correct course, but she still wanted control. "Whose name goes on the discovery?" Daniel asked. "Both." "Whose decision if conservation requires leaving damage visible?" "The board's." "Then you're buying a story, not preserving a car." Vanessa's expression tightened. "You may lose your shop while you protect a machine that cannot pay your mortgage." "That's possible." "And your son?" Daniel stood. "Don't use him to price me." He left before anger could turn into a speech. The zoning suspension cost Daniel 3 customer accounts, and his bank froze the shop's credit line. He admitted that not every loss belonged to Vanessa. He had waited too long to secure a compliant new bay. Judge Holt separated that failure from title. She extended preservation for 30 days, appointed a neutral custodian, and required Frank's estate to post a $10,000 bond. The foundation offered the bond in exchange for an exclusive purchase option. Daniel refused and put his paid-off pickup up as collateral. Owen told him he sounded like Vanessa, treating control as safety and excluding everyone else. Daniel withdrew the personal bond application and proposed a temporary stewardship trust instead. Frank's estate would deposit any title it received. The foundation would post the bond and fund stabilization, but could not sell the car. Daniel's labor would be paid and documented. Anne would represent the estate, Leon the team history, and an independent conservator could veto irreversible work. The foundation approved the new structure by 1 vote. Judge Holt accepted it, and Daniel kept his truck. He had protected the evidence without making himself its only guardian. Vanessa's position weakened further when the bank's successor produced its escrow records under subpoena. A notarized 1982 release acknowledged Kessler's sale to Frank and described the storage cradle and chassis by number. The bank had retained no lien. A handwriting examiner matched the signatures to uncontested records. The invoice was genuine. Cole's title insurer then faced a different question: why the receiver's agent had photographed Frank's debt note but omitted the satisfaction invoice stored in the same building. Martin testified that the agent had opened the west wall cavity during due diligence. He remembered seeing an envelope but assumed it contained obsolete lift certifications. He had not listed it. Vanessa asked Martin to change the phrasing in his written statement from "opened" to "observed." Martin refused. That was the moment her own employee stopped protecting the story her board preferred. At the final ownership hearing 3 weeks later, the courtroom held no race fans and no dramatic unveiling, clear throat. The Roadster remained under conservation cover at Baxter Street. What mattered lay in labeled binders. Susan presented the chain in plain order. The 1979 bankruptcy order, transferred chassis, 42BG, and the cradle to Randall Kessler, after creditors failed to redeem. The 1982 invoice transferred the cradle and all present contents to Frank Mercer in satisfaction of his equipment note. The notarized bank release identified the chassis. The blueprint and lift engineer showed the cradle was removable business equipment. Frank's ledger documented continuous maintenance. The chassis number, repair brace, material scans, and sister car comparison confirmed identity. Cole's lawyer argued that the cradle had become a fixture through decades of integration, and that Frank's estate had abandoned it by failing to disclose or remove it. The lift engineer used the 1958 blueprint to show 4 isolation pads, removable rails, and the west service opening. Ray explained how the machine could be extracted without damaging the building footings. Susan then played Vanessa's own recovery video. It showed Daniel connect his compressor to a tenant-maintained air line. It showed the independent platform rise. It also captured Vanessa saying before any investigation, "That came with my building." Breath Judge Holt did not punish confidence. She ruled from documents and conduct. The cradle had been installed as trade equipment, remained physically removable, and had been purchased by Frank. The car's title traveled through the documented bankruptcy and sale chain to Frank's estate. No evidence showed intentional abandonment. Cole Motor Holdings owned the building around the machine, not the machine or its contents. The ruling created an immediate consequence. Cole had to provide 10 days of access for engineered removal, reimburse the court-appointed custodian, and pay the moving costs caused by its access restrictions. The title insurer, not Vanessa personally, covered most fees under a settlement reached that afternoon. Cole also withdrew its zoning objection in writing and notified the city that it had no safety evidence against Daniel's new bay. Vanessa could have appealed. Her lawyers had preserved the arguments. Instead, she asked Daniel to meet at the garage one last time. The hidden cradle stood level with the floor. The car rested above it under a breathable cover. Vanessa carried the withdrawn transfer agreement but did not place it between them. "My father lost his shop because the landlord sold the building and swore the lifts were included," she said. "He had receipts. They were handwritten. Nobody cared." Daniel glanced at the sealed evidence cabinet. "So, you decided deeds were the only paper that mattered." "I decided never to be the person outside the lock. You became the person changing it." She accepted the sentence without defending herself. Sigh. "My board wanted the car because it would anchor the new showroom," she said. "I wanted it because finding something beneath a building made the building feel chosen. That was not a legal reason." Daniel waited. Vanessa handed him a letter. Cole Motor Holdings offered no ownership stake. It offered to fund the cradle's engineered removal, contribute to the foundation's conservation grant, and lease the West Service opening for 10 days at no charge. In return, the foundation could state that the car was recovered during Cole's redevelopment, provided the statement also credited Daniel and Owen by name and accurately described the dispute. "You're asking for an honest sentence this time," Daniel said. "Yes," he told her the trust would decide, not him alone. The Heritage Foundation ultimately accepted the contribution under stricter language. It did not buy the roadster. Instead, it funded Daniel's relocation to the bus bay after the city cleared the suppression system, hired Mercer Alignment as the lead stabilization shop, and created 2 paid apprentice positions. The roadster remained in the stewardship trust while provenance research continued. Daniel did not become a millionaire. He received a contract large enough to replace the lost fleet work, a properly inspected shop, and the chance to restore a machine without erasing what time had done to it. Anne retained her voice in the estate. Leon recorded 40 hours of team history. Curtis joined the conservation committee and challenged every claim that moved faster than the evidence. Owen returned to school in the fall but worked Saturdays at the new bay. His first assignment was not polishing aluminum. Daniel made him catalog every fastener removed during stabilization, photograph its location, and write the reason for removal. Owen complained exactly once. 6 months later, the roadster's body still wore storage-darkened red paint and the remains of its blue stripe. The trust chose not to make it look new. Daniel rebuilt the brakes, stabilized the frame, and left Joe Barlow's uneven steering brace weld visible beneath a clear protective coating. The damage was part of the identity, not a flaw to hide. Cole Motor Holdings opened its showroom on schedule after redesigning the center bay around a glass panel in the floor. Vanessa could have filled the opening with concrete. Instead, she displayed the original cradle blueprint and a short account of the ownership case. The final line read, "Property is not made rightful by possession, and history is not preserved by haste." Daniel would not have written the sentence that way, but the facts beneath it were accurate. On the first anniversary of the discovery, the foundation rolled chassis 42BG into the new Mercer Heritage Works Bay for a public conservation day. Leon watched by video. Anne checked visitors against the sign-in sheet. Ray stood near the lift controls and pretended not to supervise. Before the doors opened, Daniel mounted one object on the wall beside the cradle's restored air valve, Frank's old pressure gauge. The glass was scratched, and the needle still moved a fraction when the line charged. Owen connected the compressor, looked at the small red mark beneath the clear tape, and stopped the regulator at 90 pounds. Breath. The new platform rose slowly, carrying the roadster into the amber shop light. It came level without a shudder. Daniel kept his hand away from the valve and let his son finish the lift. Sigh. For most of his life, Frank's red line had meant enough pressure. Now Daniel understood the other half of the lesson. Enough proof could lift what had been buried. More force could only damage it.